Night on the highway, her car stalled, her eyes searching, and I realized, sometimes, a stranger can become exactly what you need. The night stretched long and empty, the highway ahead a ribbon of black lined with the occasional flicker of distant headlights. The hum of my tires against the asphalt was almost hypnotic, a steady rhythm that matched the quiet thoughts in my head. I hadn't expected anything unusual tonight, just another long drive, the kind that lets the mind wander into memories, regrets, or the little fragments of life that never seem to make sense until they're alone in the dark. Then, a flicker of movement caught my eye. A car ahead swerved slightly, a subtle jerk that made my stomach tense. Something was wrong. Instinct took over before rational thought. Slowing, easing my vehicle to the shoulder, headlights illuminating the edge of the road. She was there. A woman standing beside her car, one hand pressed against the roof for balance, the other on the door as if bracing herself. Even from a distance, there was a quiet strength about her, a composed posture that suggested she had faced challenges before. But in that moment, alone under the dim halo of my headlights, she seemed almost fragile, a human silhouette in need of help. I stepped out of my car, the cold night air brushing against my skin. It was sharp, almost biting, and yet it made the warmth of the encounter more immediate, more human. As I approached, the glow of the headlights fell across her face, revealing a mixture of relief and wary curiosity. Her hair caught the light, soft waves falling around her shoulders, and I noticed the faint scent of something floral, delicate, lingering in the night air. "Looks like you could use a hand," I said gently, keeping my voice calm, careful. She looked up, her eyes briefly meeting mine, a subtle spark of acknowledgement passing between us. There was no forced smile, no instant familiarity, just a quiet, honest recognition that sometimes strangers meet at the right place at the right time. I reached for the car door, and as I guided it open for her, our hands brushed, almost by accident. It was a brief, electric moment, my fingers grazing hers, enough to create a pulse of awareness without overstaying its welcome. She didn't pull away. She only adjusted her stance, her eyes softening with a fleeting, almost imperceptible smile. The night seemed to pause around us. The distant hum of passing cars, the whisper of the wind through nearby trees, even the faint smell of asphalt and cold metal. Everything became part of the shared space between us. There was no rush, no pressure. Just two people meeting unexpectedly on a lonely highway, connected by circumstance, by a silent understanding that in that precise moment, something mattered. And in that stillness, a subtle thread of curiosity began to weave itself. An unspoken question hanging between us, delicate yet insistently present. Who was she? What had brought her here, alone at this hour? And, almost instinctively, what might this fleeting encounter teach me about patience, kindness, and the quiet possibility of connection? Sometimes, the smallest gestures, a pulled-over car, a helping hand, become the start of something that lingers far longer than the night itself. And tonight, the highway wasn't just a road. It was a place where lives brushed against each other, softly, meaningfully, unexpectedly. She leaned against the side of her car, arms folded loosely, yet her posture didn't feel defensive. It was measured, careful, like she was assessing whether the night had delivered someone trustworthy. I offered a soft smile and a simple question. "Do you need help getting it started?" She hesitated, then nodded, a quiet exhale escaping her lips. As I crouched near the engine, tools in hand, she stepped closer, her presence calm but deliberate. There was an elegance in the way she moved, even in the ordinary task of watching me work. I could sense the tension in her shoulders easing, though her hands fidgeted with the edge of her sleeve. The way her eyes followed my movements wasn't intrusive. It was curious, attentive, a subtle invitation to conversation. "So, long night?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. She tilted her head, a brief smile tugging at her lips. "You could say that," she replied softly, voice carrying a warmth that seemed at odds with the chill in the air. There was a pause, a shared silence where only the soft click of tools and the distant roar of passing vehicles existed. That pause, I realized, was where the connection began. The first few minutes were cautious, polite, an exchange of information and small talk, but there was a rhythm forming beneath it. I learned that she had a life full of experiences, accomplishments, and quiet moments of solitude. Her words hinted at confidence, yet her glances betrayed the loneliness of someone used to facing the world alone. I noticed the way her fingers brushed against her hair, almost absent-mindedly, or how she occasionally rested her hand on the car roof as if grounding herself. I handed her a flashlight to get a better look at the engine, and as our fingers met, there was a small electric pause, a brush of warmth that neither of us acknowledged outright, but which lingered longer than necessary. She caught my eye then, a flicker of acknowledgement passing silently between us. It was a subtle dance of awareness, the kind that doesn't need words. A connection forming, fragile yet tangible. The night around us felt quieter, softer somehow, as if the world had shrunk to just the stretch of highway and the two of us standing in it. I could smell the faint floral trace of her perfume mixed with the metallic scent of the car, the cold air pressing against our cheeks. Every gesture, every glance, every pause and conversation carried weight. Tiny details that would linger in memory far beyond the moment itself. Even while fixing a mechanical issue, the emotional landscape was shifting. She laughed softly at a joke I hadn't even meant to be funny, and the sound lingered, echoing gently against the quiet highway. It wasn't flirtation, not exactly, but there was a warmth there, a subtle awareness of another soul recognizing your own. By the time the engine sputtered and came to life, there was a quiet understanding between us. A stranger, yes, but one who had become slightly more familiar in the span of a few minutes. Trust had begun to root itself in small, unspoken ways, in shared smiles, fleeting touches, and a gentle attentiveness that promised the night held more than just an ordinary roadside encounter. Sometimes it isn't grand gestures that matter. It's the small human moments, the hand offered, the glance returned, the vulnerability quietly shared, that create the first threads of something lasting. And tonight, those threads were already starting to weave between us. By the time roadside assistance arrived, the night had transformed into something unexpectedly intimate. The cold wind continued to press against our faces, but there was a warmth in the space between us that hadn't been there before. A quiet, lingering tension that wasn't romantic in a rush, but deeply human. We moved slightly closer to each other as we waited, our steps unconsciously falling into the same rhythm on the gravel shoulder. Conversation flowed more easily now. She spoke of the books she loved, the trips she had taken, the moments that had shaped her quietly but profoundly. I listened, genuinely drawn to the way her eyes lit up when she recalled small victories or personal anecdotes. There was a grace to her storytelling, a patience in her pauses that demanded attention. Every now and then, her gaze flickered to mine, searching, measuring, curious yet restrained. I found myself sharing fragments of my own life too. Not the polished or perfect version, but the parts one usually kept hidden. The night seemed to invite honesty, the way it muffled the world and focused attention on the space we occupied together. In that stillness, words mattered more, and silences carried weight. There was a sense that if I leaned closer, even slightly, the air between us would shift in ways both thrilling and delicate. At one point, a shiver ran down her spine from the wind. Without thinking, I offered her a jacket I'd kept in the back seat. She accepted it, her fingers brushing mine briefly as she pulled it over her shoulders. The touch was fleeting, accidental, but it sent a quiet ripple through both of us. An unspoken acknowledgement that neither of us wanted to leave this closeness just yet. I could feel the warmth radiating from her, the subtle brush of fabric against my fingers, and it was enough to make the cold night air feel softer, almost intimate. We laughed over small observations, pointed out the distant lights along the highway, and even shared quiet moments of just standing side by side, letting the other's presence fill the empty space. Her laughter was not loud or performative. It was soft, real, and somehow grounding. It made me aware of my own pulse, the way my chest seemed to open a little in her presence. There was a quiet, magnetic pull in the way our eyes met. Not a forced stare, not a dramatic cinematic moment, but the subtle acknowledgement of two souls noticing each other deeply, if only for a night. When she shifted to lean slightly on the car, the motion was graceful yet natural. I found myself observing, not in a superficial way, but noticing how her comfort around me was slowly growing, how her confidence and vulnerability existed together effortlessly. As the roadside workers approached, bringing the necessary tools to repair her car, neither of us seemed eager to leave the conversation. Even in the brief pauses, there was a shared understanding. Something important had begun here, a connection that was tender, unspoken, and undeniably present. Small touches, lingering glances, the shared space of that roadside shoulder. All these moments carried more weight than either of us expected. And in that quiet exchange, I realized, sometimes the most profound connections happen not through grand gestures or planned encounters, but in the simple act of being present, attentive, and aware. Tonight, the highway was no longer just a stretch of asphalt. It was the place where two lives began to brush against each other meaningfully, with the promise of more to come. By the time her car was nearly fixed, a strange tension had settled over the night. The roadside workers were efficient, their presence creating the illusion of urgency, yet all I could focus on was her. She moved with a quiet grace, carefully monitoring their work, occasionally brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, and every now and then her gaze found mine. A subtle, fleeting glance that carried curiosity, vulnerability, and something I couldn't quite name. I felt it too, an awareness, almost electric in its quietness, tugging at my chest. But alongside it came hesitation. She was older, more experienced, and clearly independent in a way I admired. The thought of the age difference, of life paths so clearly distinct, made my pulse quicken in a mix of desire and restraint. I wanted to bridge the distance, to lean closer, to feel the warmth of her presence in a more deliberate way, but something held me back. The rightness of the moment collided with the reality of social expectation, and I felt a tension that wasn't dramatic but deeply human. She laughed softly at something one of the workers said, a light, natural sound that carried over the hum of the car engine. My eyes lingered on her, noticing how the streetlight highlighted the curve of her smile and the subtle sparkle in her eyes. Her confidence was undeniable, but it was tempered by a quiet vulnerability that made her magnetic. And yet, every time I imagined stepping closer, touching her hand again, letting my fingers brush hers deliberately, I hesitated, aware that this delicate thread of connection could easily fray if mishandled. She seemed aware too. There were moments when her shoulders tensed, just slightly, or when her gaze dropped, only to meet mine again a heartbeat later. The tension wasn't forced. It was organic, a push and pull between attraction and caution. I could sense the same unspoken question lingering between us. How much of this connection was safe to explore tonight, and how much would remain as fleeting memory? The night air pressed against our skin, colder now as the wind shifted, and instinctively, I offered her my jacket. She accepted with a small nod, her fingers grazing mine for the briefest instant. That small touch, seemingly inconsequential, sent a jolt through me. It was a reminder of both the closeness and the boundary, how near we could be without overstepping, how charged silence could feel. Even as the car roared back to life, ready to carry her away, the internal conflict didn't ease. Part of me wanted to suggest she stay a little longer, to prolong the connection that had been woven in small glances, laughter, and touches. Another part recognized the transient beauty of the moment. Sometimes attraction is meant to be acknowledged quietly, felt deeply, but never fully realized in the now. The highway stretched before us, dark and open, yet my attention remained fixed on her. The pull toward her was undeniable, but so was the awareness that tonight was a night for subtlety, patience, and respect. And in that awareness, I realized something important. Sometimes the most powerful connections are the ones that make you hesitate, the ones that linger in thought, and the ones that quietly reshape the way you notice the world. By the time her car was finally ready to move, the night had shifted. What had begun as a simple act of roadside assistance had transformed into something quieter, more meaningful. The tension between us was no longer just curiosity or fleeting attraction. It had settled into something warmer, subtler, yet undeniably present. Standing side by side, I could feel it in the space between us, the invisible thread that drew our attention closer without demanding words. She leaned slightly against the car, checking over the engine with practiced eyes. I noticed how the soft glow from the streetlights reflected off her hair, catching the gentle waves that framed her face. There was a delicate elegance in her movements, effortless and natural, yet every glance carried the weight of awareness, of us, and what had been quietly growing tonight. The wind tugged at her jacket, and I instinctively stepped closer, offering subtle shelter without overtly intruding. My arm brushed against hers, a fleeting touch, but enough to send warmth spiraling through me. She didn't move away. Instead, her gaze lifted, meeting mine with a quiet acknowledgement. It was as if the night itself had compressed into this shared moment, leaving everything else at a safe distance. For a brief stretch, words felt unnecessary. Silence became our conversation. The faint hum of distant cars, the rustle of leaves, the crunch of gravel beneath our feet. All of it filled the spaces between us in a comforting, grounding way. And yet, within that calm, there was electricity. The subtle awareness of proximity, the brush of a sleeve, the accidental meeting of fingers when she adjusted her stance. These small gestures carried the intimacy that neither of us wanted to rush, the gentle magnetism of two people learning the contours of each other's presence. She laughed softly at something I said, not out of politeness but genuine amusement. It was a sound that lingered, wrapping around me in a way that made my chest feel unexpectedly full. I realized then how deeply I was noticing her. The tilt of her head, the curve of her smile, the way she occasionally looked away and back again as if measuring the moment. Every detail was amplified, meaningful, charged with unspoken possibilities. As we walked toward our respective vehicles, the pace slowed, and instinctively, we stepped closer without consciously deciding. There was a shared reluctance to break the connection, a silent agreement to savor the final minutes before departure. Her fingers brushed mine briefly, accidentally yet deliberately, sending a shiver of recognition through both of us. It wasn't urgency or desperation. It was a quiet acknowledgement that something significant had begun tonight. Even as she slid into her car, there was a weight to the goodbye that neither words nor gestures could fully capture. Our eyes lingered on each other, and in that lingering, the story of the night, the shared glances, touches, laughter, and silences, felt complete in itself. A night that began with a simple act of kindness had become a turning point, a quiet revelation that connection can appear unexpectedly, deeply, and meaningfully when least expected. Sometimes, a single night is enough to change the way you notice life. And tonight, on that quiet highway, it was clear that this encounter, brief, subtle, and carefully cherished, was one I would carry with me long after the engine had roared away and the lights had faded. Her car engine purred softly, ready to take her away, yet neither of us seemed eager to break the connection we had built. The night had deepened into a calm, quiet rhythm, the hum of distant traffic and the whisper of the wind forming a gentle soundtrack to our lingering presence. Every detail of the evening, the way her hair caught the streetlight, the soft curve of her smile, the subtle warmth of her touch, was etched in my mind. We exchanged numbers, a simple gesture that carried more weight than words could express. As I held my phone, our fingers brushed once more, deliberate this time, yet understated, a fleeting contact that left a warmth in my chest. It was an unspoken promise, a mutual acknowledgement that while the night was ending, the connection need not fade completely. She didn't rush, and neither did I. There was a shared understanding that some moments deserved to be savored, not hurried. She gave a small nod, a quiet smile, and slid into the driver's seat. I watched her hands on the steering wheel, steady and poised, and noticed a soft exhale as she glanced toward me one last time. It wasn't dramatic or overly sentimental, just a quiet, human acknowledgement of what had been shared. I realized then that the most meaningful connections often happen not through grand declarations, but through subtle, attentive presence. The brush of fingers, a shared laugh, or simply standing near someone and noticing the space they occupy in your life. The car began to roll forward, and for a moment, I felt a tug of longing. But it was tempered by gratitude. Gratitude for the night, for the conversation, for the intimacy that had unfolded without pressure or expectation. The cold night air pressed against me, yet I felt warm, carrying the memory of her touch, the soft cadence of her voice, and the quiet, unspoken trust that had grown between us. I lingered for a moment after she drove away, watching the glow of her taillights fade into the darkness. The highway, once just asphalt and distance, now felt like a place where lives could intersect meaningfully, even briefly. I traced the spot where our hands had touched, savoring the warmth that lingered longer than it should. It was proof that connection doesn't always demand permanence. It can leave an imprint simply by being felt deeply and respectfully. Driving away myself, the night seemed different. The highway no longer felt empty. It was filled with memory, with the quiet intimacy of a fleeting encounter that had changed the way I noticed small details. The curve of a smile, the warmth of a hand, the fleeting spark of recognition in someone's eyes. I realized that these moments, brief though they may be, often leave the deepest mark. Sometimes it isn't about who stays or who leaves. It's about the way someone makes you feel seen, noticed, and quietly appreciated. And tonight she had done exactly that. In the end, the highway had not just been a place of travel. It had been a place of connection, of warmth, and of a subtle but lasting emotional imprint. A hero, perhaps, isn't someone who changes the world, but someone who appears at the right time, in the right way, and leaves you quietly transformed. The drive home was quiet, almost meditative. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, dark and familiar, yet nothing about it felt ordinary anymore. Every hum of the tires on asphalt, every flicker of distant headlights seemed infused with memory. The laughter, the soft brush of fingers, the warmth of a fleeting touch. The night had passed in a way that neither of us could have predicted, leaving traces that lingered long after the headlights had faded. I replayed the evening in my mind, slowly, deliberately. The way she had leaned slightly against her car, the subtle curve of her smile when she laughed at something trivial, the way her eyes had searched mine, not in demand, not in expectation, but in quiet acknowledgement. It was in those small, almost imperceptible moments that the true weight of our connection had revealed itself. The highway had been the backdrop, the canvas for something far more intimate. She had arrived into my night as a stranger, but in the hours we had shared, she had become a presence impossible to ignore. A reminder that human connection can appear unexpectedly, quietly, and yet profoundly. I realized that the fleeting nature of it didn't make it less significant. It made it sharper, more vivid in memory, like the lingering scent of perfume long after the wearer has gone. Every detail seemed to echo in my chest. The cold breeze brushing our faces, the distant hum of traffic, the almost electric pause whenever our fingers had met. Even the silence between words had been meaningful, a language of unspoken understanding that doesn't need explanation. It was a slow, deliberate intimacy, shaped not by grand gestures but by the attentiveness of two people fully present in a shared moment. As the miles passed beneath me, I understood that some nights exist simply to remind us of the quiet power of human presence. The reassurance that someone can notice you, even briefly, and leave an imprint on your heart. It was the kind of connection that didn't require words, did not demand reciprocation, and yet enriched both lives simply by existing. The highway had been more than a road tonight. It had been a threshold, a space where vulnerability, trust, and subtle desire intersected without fanfare. I smiled to myself, the warmth spreading across my chest. There was no rush, no urgency to see her again, only the gratitude of having experienced something rare and genuine. In that quiet reflection, I recognized a lesson. Meaningful connections don't always unfold in expected ways. Sometimes, they appear in the soft brush of a hand, the lingering glance across a hooded engine, the shared laughter on a lonely stretch of road. And even though she had driven away, the memory of her remained. A gentle, persistent presence in the back of my mind, a quiet reminder that the night had been extraordinary. Sometimes a hero isn't someone who changes your life in grand ways. Sometimes, a hero simply shows up when you need one, offers a hand, and leaves you changed, quietly but completely. The highway rolled on, empty and endless, but I was not alone. Somewhere ahead, somewhere behind, the night had left its mark, a slow, deliberate connection that would linger, warm, subtle, and unforgettable.